Hey folks, Andy Patton here, joined by NBA writer and Gonzaga alumni Jackson Frank. Jackson and I are going to discuss a handful of the Gonzaga alumni currently playing in the NBA and how their seasons have gone so far, all right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Don't go away.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, ready to take you through another season of Gonzaga Hoops. Today's episode is brought to you by Sonos. Sonos is the official sponsor of ESPN College Football. Go to Sonos.com to learn more. All right, super excited for today's episode, joined by special guest Jackson Frank. Jackson has written for basically every NBA site that I saw. I was going to put them all down, but I thought it would be easier to just say he writes at a lot of places. He's been doing that for a long time. Obviously, Gonzaga alumni. Outstanding Twitter follow. If you do not follow Jackson, you can find him at JackFrank_JJF on Twitter. Jackson, thank you so much for taking the time today to jump on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about some former Gonzaga players, and they're, like we were talking before the show, there's an increasing number of them playing key roles on some pretty good teams, and so it's always enjoyable when there's more than just one or two guys to discuss.
Yeah, this wouldn't have been a segment you'd have been able to do very often on a Gonzaga podcast. Even like 4 or 5 years ago, it would have been pretty much not impossible, but you'd have been talking about Kelly Olynyk a lot because that was about the only guy for a while. And it's been just such a surge, and I think I'm curious your thoughts on, as somebody who's followed Gonzaga for a while before you were even writing about the NBA. It feels to me like there's a lot of guys who probably should have gotten a shot and never did. Do you think that that's kind of the case, or is it more of just they got a lot more better talent in the last couple of years, and that's why we've seen this kind of explosion of guys in the league?
Yeah, it's tough for me to know exactly, just because I think the nuance that I have when it comes to basketball analysis between both Gonzaga players themselves and what warrants a spot in the NBA is really kind of grown, but. I think it's more the latter, in the sense that as Gonzaga's quality of recruits and talent has increased, they've had more NBA caliber guys. I think we'll get into it, but there still is a certain level of disconnect between what thrives for most of the teams Gonzaga, or what thrives against most of the teams that Gonzaga plays, and what thrives in the NBA. It's just reality. There's more that goes into it than just athleticism, and that's a broad term itself, but that still does matter to an extent. And so I do feel like, you've seen Gonzaga be able to thrive a little more when they get guys like Brandon Clarke, or even Jalen Suggs, or, even Killian Tillie is a pretty solid athlete. So that helps. I wish I had been watching the NBA and watching Gonzaga in depth since 2005 or something like that. Or even 2012, 2011, but I just don't have that level of nuance, unfortunately. But I think, I lean more toward the latter. I think that's fair too, right? Because Gonzaga's had, some of its best team, or just its best teams, in the last 5 or 6 years, when they've had more guys, so they sent more guys to the league, and not just guys to the league, but ones who actually, make a dent, or not make a dent, but are playing rotation minutes. Look at a guy like Kevin Pangos, who is in the NBA, but has been he's a little bit more on the fringes when overseas, and now you have other guys are sitting there playing key roles, at Gonzaga, and then also key roles in the NBA, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of guys who are going straight into the league and playing big time minutes, and that's been something that. When you look through even the players, Gonzaga has frequently had at least one or two guys in the league for, the last couple of decades, but rarely have they been, it was like Rony Turioff was like a shining example of like a guy who was actually in the league and playing minutes. And now there are multiple guys who are playing as many minutes as Rony Turioff was playing when he was in the league. It's just, it's changed so much, and it's been such a good thing to see. And now they got all-stars, and that's kind of, where I wanted to start with this show. You did a really nice article maybe a month ago now about Domantas Sabonis, obviously a player who's aspiring to be a 3-time All-Star. His last week has certainly helped his cause for potentially being an All-Star. He had a triple-double, a 42-point game against Utah without Rudy Gobert. Just a monster week for him. And when you wrote that article a couple weeks ago, you kind of talked about the Rick Carlisle experiment in Indiana and how that has kind of impacted Sabonis's usage. And I'm curious if you could kind of touch a little bit on what that article, kind of what you talked about in that article, and maybe if you've noticed, and I don't know if you know how much you've paid attention since then, but if you've noticed anything different with his usage lately, or if he's just kind of making the best of a not great situation in Indiana.
Yeah. So the basis of that article was talking about how, the Pacers weren't doing that well, and they still, I think they're 15-25, maybe 15-26. I don't know exactly. They're near the bottom of the East, which is, probably lower than they should be, despite some injuries and whatnot.
Yeah.
And last year when Sabonis had his best season under Nate Bjorkgren, obviously Bjorkgren has his own issues, but they really kind of empowered Sabonis to, he would bring the ball up the floor sometimes, lead transition. He would if there wasn't a transition opportunity, he'd be able to kind of back his way into the post against a mismatch, make stuff happen from the elbows. And they would sprinkle in, dribble handoffs and him rolling the rim because he's a very good finisher and a very good passer and arguably the best screener in the NBA. And this year it's been largely the dribble handoffs and pick and roll, which is fine. In a vacuum, it's okay. Let's say, maybe it's tough to always run everything through Sabonis because he has some limitations. He's pretty dominant with his left hand. He's not a great outside shooter, of course. But the thing is, Indiana doesn't have the ball handlers to use that strategy much. Malcolm Brogdon's been very good, but he's a guy that's still overextended. Karis LeVert has really struggled this year. They're running pick and rolls with guys like Justin Holiday at times, Torrey Craig, guys who should really be more spotting up, attacking closeouts, cutting. And so that was the basis of it. It's like, yeah, I understand that Sabonis in a great offense probably isn't the guy that you're building everything around. He's not your 1A. He's probably a 1B or a 2.
Right.
I get that, or second option, whatever you want to frame it as. But you don't have a better option available. And so it was kind of as though they were trying to build this offense like they ran in Dallas with Luka Doncic and, all those shooters and whatnot. But they didn't have the personnel for it. They were trying to put all these flawed ball handlers to replicate what Doncic does. That doesn't work. And so it's talking about how you got to, it's not ideal that, you're probably not going to put together a top 6 offense and then if that Sabonis is your help and he's getting all these post touches and whatnot. But you can be better than, I don't know where they were at the time. I think I listed in there maybe 15th, 17th somewhere. You can be better than what you are. And so it was talking about that. But it recently, largely due to circumstance, we've seen at times he has gotten some more touches because Malcolm Brogdon's been out for I think at least a week, maybe a week and a half now. He was out at times early in the year with an injury or two. And so it's definitely, it's improved a little bit, but I'll be interested to see what happens when Brogdon comes back. Because as you mentioned, Sabonis has been playing pretty well. Of course, it hasn't coincided in wins for the Pacers. I think they've lost, I want to say 7 out of 8 now, unfortunately. A lot of close losses. You look at this, looking at the regular now, lose by 8, 2, 4, 10, 8, 3. The last one was in overtime against another team in Boston who hasn't been great this year, unfortunately. So that was kind of the basis of it. And you're just kind of looking at the idea that, yeah, ideally, if you had a guy like Luka or even a guy who's maybe a step below Luka because, he's right at the top among guys running offense through in the NBA, then, yeah, I get using Sabonis that way. But you don't have a better option. So it was discussing that. But, yeah, I have seen a little bit of roll shift. I haven't caught a game in probably about a week from them. But, and the kid, I think he had 32, against Indiana, against Cleveland last weekend, and that's the last game I caught from them. And he, got a few more touches in the post, leading the offense on the break a little more. So pretty curious to see what happens when when Brogdon comes back. If he even does come back before trade happens, because Sabonis has been, Brogdon can't be traded because he signed an extension, but Sabonis obviously has been involved in rumors now for about a couple of months. So definitely something to monitor. But yeah, he's been on a roll even so. And that's the other thing is, like his individual numbers have been very good. Like because a lot of passes he just kind of spoon-fed touches. And he's a really good finisher with incredible footwork and all those pivots and whatnot. But I think the possessions outside of when Sabonis is finishing plays haven't been as optimal for the entire team. So I think the line I tried to use is that it's simplified his role, but it's made everything more challenging for everyone else. Which is not ideal. So kind of a long-winded segment there, but I hope it illuminates kind of why he's playing well, but maybe why he isn't benefiting the entire team as much as would be ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you kind of touched on, obviously Carlisle came over and kind of took over this team with the personnel already in place and tried to kind of shoehorn what he had success doing in Dallas, which I think pretty clearly wasn't going to work, but obviously he clearly didn't believe that and gave it a shot. But I'm always at least I can understand, trying to you take over this personnel and you get, you're gifted the guys that you get. That's kind of just the way that it works. But what has always baffled me about Sabonis's career in particular is, Billy Donovan and the Thunder, they chose him. They acquired him in a draft day trade. Like, they picked him. And then in his first year, like, they used him as if they had never watched him play basketball before. And it was one of the most baffling things. Like, this is different. They're at least utilizing him, even though they were trying to kind of stick him out around the 3-point line a fair amount early in this season in Indiana. But in Oklahoma City, that was all they did. And that was not his game at all. And it's just, I'm glad he's making a better situation out of it this year. At least statistically, he's performing well. But man, like, I cannot imagine, and we'll talk about it a little bit later with another player who's going to come up in a different segment, who a team selected on draft day and didn't seem to know how to utilize. And I don't really understand how, like, I get Gonzaga basketball is, it's not Duke, but you'd think you'd know what guys you're getting when you're picking these guys in the draft, but not every time, apparently.
Yeah, I think at least in the OKC, not that they use him correctly, but I think you could at least make the case that, like, they had Russell Westbrook. I don't know, did they have that was Westbrook's MVP, or they had Victor Oladipo, Steven Adams. Like, they had at least, like, Sabonis was a guy that probably, like, he had to fit more into an offense than he deserves now. Or like the offense should be built around him, right? It should be built around him and Brogdon. So I could understand it then, but it was still weird. I think, like, and look at the numbers now. This year is his highest 3-point rate besides his rookie year. Right. I don't think he's ever going to come back close to that. Rookie year is about 33% of his shots were from beyond the arc, which is just wild. So I think there's definitely some parallels there. But obviously, he warrants a larger consideration of the offense these days, and has done pretty well in it. His assist rate is down a little bit, but it's still the third, about almost right in line with his second highest mark behind last season. So still having a very good year. And I don't think he's quite going to get to that All-Star level. Some of that too is because people aren't just going to select him because people tend to look at record. I think to an extent there's, like, I don't think record itself is how you should ever assess whether a player is deserving All-Star, but I think there's at least some truth behind it. Like, I'm not saying he's the reason the Pacers aren't as good, but I think if he was having the same level of impact he even had last year when he was an All-Star, they would have at least a couple more. I'm not saying he's not the reason, but I would probably have him just off there, but he's at least been in that top 15 to 17 category among guys in the East, which is really cool. I mean, to be considered an All-Star for the third straight year is really awesome. Maybe even fourth straight year. I mean, I don't recall exactly what the conversation was like that second year in Indiana when he was really good, but still warrants consideration, which is cool. And they're still 3 weeks until they finalize teams. So who knows? Injuries can happen. Maybe the Pacers find some consistency. Sabonis continues to have monster games like he's had as of late, and the narrative turns a little bit. So we'll see. But he's absolutely in the conversation, which is really cool. He's having a good year despite not ideal circumstances, which I think is not a good thing. But I think it's a testament to the players when they can still thrive even if they're not being used ideally.
Absolutely. And I think, there's a possibility of a trade too. You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. I'm curious if there are, if you've thought about teams that might make some sense for him, or if you think a trade is something that's going to happen, or if you think Indiana is going to kind of just bite it and maybe move Miles Turner and keep trying to go through Sabonis instead.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know exactly. The Pacers are a team that don't have a huge media footprint. I mean, I follow a few people that I really, really enjoy, and so I try to keep up with that sort of thing. And just reading some of it, does seem like maybe Turner might be the guy who was more likely to be moved. Just he's been benched in some fourth. I don't know about bench. He's not closed some games in fourth quarters. He's not used ideally either. So he feels a little more like a guy who is on the move, and I think maybe his skill set's a little easier to just put into a team rather than Sabonis. You need to build around a little more because he's much worse defensively. He doesn't space the floor. Whereas Turner, it's like, okay, you're gonna shoot threes, you're gonna defend pick and rolls, you're gonna anchor the paint. And that's pretty easy if you need starting center. But I think some teams that you could make some sense. I mentioned like Boston could make some sense. I think they're a team that it's maybe a bit of a murky fit with guys like Al Horford and Robert Williams. I don't think you have to worry a ton long term about fitting around Al Horford, but Robert Williams is he's a big man who's taken some strides last couple of years and is just locked up long term for an extension there. So they make some sense. They could certainly use some help offensively. Sabonis will provide that. They have pretty good defense. I think they're 6th or 7th in defensive rating this year. It's been the offense that's really an issue for them. I think Sabonis being a guy who works in the pick and roll with Jason Tatum, when Jason Tatum draws double teams and stuff on ball screens would help there. Just a little more ability to make some happen closer to the basket, I think would help Boston a lot there. Again, it's still kind of murky because they have two of their better players are big men and locked up for more than one more year, but I think that can make some sense for sure. I think I wonder about a team maybe like the Raptors. I don't know exactly what they don't really have anyone inside right now. They're starting Kem Birch. He was a fine rotation center. He's a good rotation center, I would say, but not a guy you want to be starting on a team that's 20 and 17. So that makes some sense to me. I have to look a little more. I know obviously the Mavs are a team that probably you could see what's up there. I mentioned Sabonis working when teams when teams double team Jason Tatum. I mean, teams do that even more with Luka. So sorry, someone has just knocked on my door. It's probably just a package. They're not going to knock again. But anyhow, that would be another team I think makes some sense. And you have a big man in Kristaps Porzingis that can space the floor. Right, that's kind of the key. Is if you're going to maximize Sabonis offensively, you need a guy who can stretch the floor alongside him in the front court. So Sabonis has been up and down defensively. Obviously, it's not a great pairing with Miles Turner, but it's not terrible, right? It's a guy who's very, very good defensively and can space the floor at center. Kristaps is obviously much worse defensively, but I think you've seen some flashes at times, especially pre-meniscus tear, I think, when he tore his meniscus in the bubble. So that's another team that makes sense. The Grizzlies as well. I think that's a team that, depending if they want to, I'm sure we'll talk about them soon. Yeah. But that's a team that, they traded Jonas Valanciunas. Looked like maybe they're going to go a little more toward youth development, but the youth development worked too well almost. Jaws better than last year. Desmond Bane's taken a big step forward. Steve Adams solid in the middle, but I think he's a guy that you could look to improve upon. So those are just a few teams I think make some sense, but there certainly should be a market for him. I mean, he's a tremendously good player, as we've said. I think there are some pretty clean fits, I would say, relatively clean, and those are ones that make sense. But I think the Grizzlies, like I said, they've got a bunch of good players, some guys that could help springboard a rebuild for Indiana. I don't know how many of those guys they want to move, and you could get some Zag for Zag movement in there, but they definitely feel like they have enough guys, too many guys, honestly, to play all of them that could help in other ways, and the guys are pretty young. So I think the Grizzlies might be my favorite option in the West, and the Boston out east, but definitely should be a pretty palatable market for Sabonis.
Absolutely. The Gonzaga Grizzlies would be super fun if they could add Domantas Sabonis, although it would cut significantly into playing time for the other Zags if they obviously didn't move in that trade as well. Jackson and I got more Zags in the NBA, including, of course, Brandon Clarke and Killian Tillie. We'll talk about them later in the show. Before we get there, though, I want to tell you all about Get Upside. Hey, Zags fans, Andy Patton here with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about, Get Upside. My listeners are making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code SCORE, and you'll get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code SCORE to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon or other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code SCORE to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code SCORE. All right, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still joined today on Locked On Zags by Jackson Frank. We're going to move away from the Domantas Sabonis conversation. Obviously, a lot we could talk about with the potential 3-time All-Star, or at least right in that conversation for another All-Star appearance for the big man. I want to talk about Gonzaga's rookies, though. Obviously, 2 players drafted in the top 15, I believe. Corey Kispert was 15th overall, and Jalen Suggs, of course, 4th overall pick in the draft. We can start with Jalen Suggs, obviously a guy who has not played since late November. He suffered a thumb injury. It sounds like he's coming back pretty soon. I haven't seen anything definitive on that last time I checked anyway, which was yesterday. So it sounds like he's going to be back soon. We saw glimpses of the player that he was at Gonzaga, glimpses of this guy who could be a legitimate stud on both ends of the floor in the NBA. We also saw a player who looked like he was 19, like he looked really young, and he struggled with his shot pretty significantly. I don't know that he was used to being on a team that wasn't winning a lot of basketball games. That was a pretty big difference for him. I'm curious. I know it's been a while since we've gotten to see him in game action, but I'm curious if you have a lot of impressions on him and kind of what he's looked like so far in the NBA.
Yeah, the Magic honestly have been one of my favorite teams to watch, which sounds really funny, but they have a lot of young guys. I like the way that Jamal Mosley's coached them up. So I watched a lot of Suggs before, and obviously, I wanted to monitor, Jalen as well, because I've been watching him since he was at Minnehaha, and obviously watched a ton of Gonzaga. So I think it's obviously about when anyone gets injured. Like that's just that's the reality. But I think it was even more of unfortunate timing because I think he was starting to figure things out to an extent. Some of his biggest issues are whether it's lack of like a dynamic ball handling or even just ball control. But one of those two or both of them has kind of been an issue for him. You saw that at Gonzaga at times, and that was definitely an issue. Like he just struggles to get down. He does not struggles to get downhill. He actually did but he struggles to make things happen once he gets into those spots. And ball pressure can really frustrate him. And then, when he gets downhill, he has a tendency to want to jump off 2 feet, and that's not always, an option. Sometimes you got to be able to jump off one and really make stuff happen there.
Right.
And then obviously mentioned the jumpers was, mostly Cole, but you had some games, where you hit 4 threes a couple of times. I think he had a couple of games, at least 2 or 3, made triples. So, that's the upside. But I think, what was encouraging to me is I feel like he was starting to do. He's one of the things that people always talked about, right? Was that he's a really, really high feel player. Like you just see that. And I think he was starting to figure out how to adapt. He'd get into the lane and he would throw a little up fake and get the defender to bite and then finish on the other side quickly with a reverse, something like that. The passing has still been pretty impressive. The defense, I think, has been okay. I think he's still learning. He plays such a risk heavy style at Gonzaga, and he was empowered to, right? Because they want to get on transition, and get stuff happening with Joel Ayayi and Andrew Nembhard and Corey Kispert, make those plays. But that's not as not as tenable in the NBA. Players are smarter. They know how to burn that style more, and so he would get to play. Let's say he's guarding a guy in the weak side corner. He would be playing all the way over to try to maybe like steal an entry pass or steal something, and they would cut or they would rotate up, and he would be all out of sorts. But you also saw times where he would kind of peek back and he would notice them, start to move, and so he would subtly shift where he was, and he'd get an interception, make something happen there. So, I think it was less. It was not the start I anticipated. Like I thought he'd play a little better, but you were definitely starting to see strides, right around maybe the last, I want to say 6 or 7 games, starting like he had a nice game against the Knicks in mid-November. But over his last 8, he was only shooting 38% from the floor, which is about like 34% from 3 is a little better, I think. About 4 assists, about a steal. So not great numbers, but the games I did catch, I felt like he was doing better to generate good shots for himself and others around the rim, or just not around the rim, just in general. And so that was really important for him. And even that Philadelphia game, when he went out, I think maybe in the third quarter, I was pretty impressed. Obviously, I covered the Sixers as well, so I was catching that game live. I'm sure it'll take him a little bit of time to shake off the rust because he's been out for about 6 weeks now. But you're definitely seeing some pretty definitive signs of progress, in terms of how he was processing things and trying to make things happen as one of the prominent ball handlers on the team. And the other thing too is, I think, not just the fact that he was adapting to, NBA speed, NBA opponents, but also on a team where, he was handling the ball less too. I think, at Gonzaga, at least, transition, he was the guy, right? Most of the time, like he would play. In the half court, it was a pretty egalitarian offense, whether it was Drew Timme, Joel Ayayi, Andrew Nembhard. But he still ran a lot of stuff in the half court, pick and rolls, dribble handoffs. But Orlando, they have Cole Anthony, who's having a really good year. Franz Wagner was really starting to figure things out, who has figured things out, to an extent. But he was really starting to pick it up as Jalen Suggs also picked it up. So that's also another thing. But I like the cutting as well. So probably a little less optimistic than not. I would say a little less early returns weren't as good as I anticipated, but I think you were definitely trending upward, which is what you want to see. So,
Yep.
It's funny. I was talking with a couple people that are like, I didn't forget about him, but it's been so long that I'm excited to watch him and hope that we get to see continuation of maybe some of the progress he showed, in the last couple of weeks before he got injured, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And I think, rookie development is so difficult, obviously, because you always expect it to happen on a certain timeline. And certainly the higher you are selected, the more likely I think people expect that you're going to be really good right away. And so you look at like a guy like Chris Duarte, who had this outstanding start to his career and was good immediately, versus somebody like the next player we're going to talk about, Corey Kispert, who is also a senior, same age, similar, not super similar style of players, but the kind of the veterans of the first round, and Duarte got off to this really hot start in his career, and Corey Kispert, for a variety of different reasons, mostly he was not in the rotation. I think Washington, shortly after they drafted him, then they then traded for half of the Lakers roster in order to get rid of Russell Westbrook, and I think that really kind of shot Corey Kispert's chance of having a significant role right away. It crushed it. And then obviously Kuzma's been incredible, which has been part of this challenge for Kispert. But then he came out, he had that monster game at Madison Square Garden, 20 points, hit all of his threes. Now we're starting to see him be a lot more like the player that he was at Gonzaga. I don't know, again, how much Washington you've been able to check out this year, but what have you seen out of him as he's kind of started to grow into his feel as an NBA player?
Yeah, obviously, the Russell Westbrook trade was tough for him because it added a lot of wing depth. Primarily it was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Kyle Kuzma, two guys who have been pretty dang good for Washington. And then they have, a second-year guy in Denny Avdia who's been very good as well. But they could still use Kispert's service, like his ability to be an off-pusher. They need more of that. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope brought that. Kuzma on this ridiculous run as of late has brought it. But that's not Denny's game. Beal has struggled from three. Spencer Dinwiddie is a guy they signed, is not really a high-level spot-up shooter. He's a guy that likes to shoot off the dribble. He's going to do anything from deep. But I think what really stuck out to me was the start of his season was kind of a continuation of the national championship game for Kispert, in the sense that, those Baylor might have been the most, had the most high-level athletes and good players that you could find in college last year.
Yeah.
And they're kind of similar this way to an extent with different guys. And that was, a jarring difference for Drew Timme, Corey Kispert, Jalen Suggs. And I think that was similar to what has happened to both, Jalen Suggs and Corey Kispert to an extent. But Kispert too, because, for whatever reason, he just didn't have the rhythm from three for most of that.
Yeah.
I think maybe outside of the first round in the NCAA tournament, I feel like he wasn't, on top. I think like the games they won easily, like he wasn't the leading guy there. And so I think what he struggled with a little bit was he has a bit of a slow release. Some guys can just catch it here and then go up. He likes to bring the ball down, which is natural. A lot of guys do it.
Sure.
But he doesn't bring the ball as high as some other guys. You compare another, high-level shooter out of the draft, older guy, Desmond Bane. He brings the ball higher, but when he finishes it off, then Kispert's more on the face. Bane is above the head. And so he just struggled to kind of get his shot off as cleanly. He was missing a lot of shots, not just long or short, off to the side, things like that are kind of encouraging. But I think as of late, you've seen a little more, he's maybe quickening his release a little bit, figuring out ways to just get a little more space, because the one thing that has been constantly encouraging, he's still a really, really heady off-ball player, whether it's moving to openings around the arc to try and find space, cutting, maybe setting a screen for a guy to open someone else up for a cut or a three. But over the last 13 games, a little better, 36% from three. Obviously, you draft him to be a guy who's 38, 39, 40, 41%.
Right.
But a little better, I think. Those numbers are hurt a little bit by 2 of 10 over the last couple of games. Of course, still matters. There's small samples in general, so you can't throw that out.
Right.
But I think he's starting to figure things out a little bit. Obviously, it's unfortunate because you would hope that what you want from him is to be right. He's one of those guys that gets the kind of the NBA ready, kind of tailor-made role, because of his age. So
right.
I think he's figured things out a little bit. But the speed, just the speed of the game, the speed of the athletes has really hurt him. I think he knows where to be a lot of times on defense as well, but he just doesn't have lateral foot speed, both on and off the ball, to make every rotation, which is tough. So,
right.
It's been a tough start, but, I've tried to check in on, Kispert and the Wizards every, 4 or 5, 6 days, and just kind of monitor his progress. And as you mentioned, he hasn't been in the rotation all the time. As of late, he has been. I think the Wizards have been dealing with some COVID issues as well, which every team is, which is a bummer. But I think he was in the rotation. He's been kind of in and out and in, and so that's never easy for anyone. But I do feel like, when I've caught a few of his games, when he's had a solidified run over the last 5-6 weeks, he's been better than he was early in the year. And so the hope is he can continue that and maybe snap out of the funk he's had the last couple of games, and because he does give them an important presence with his movement and his off-ball shooting ideally. So I think that would be important. But yeah, just in general, the speed of the game has really been tough for him. And if you, again, any Gonzaga fan listening to this podcast, I'm sure watched that national championship. And so I would say it's been akin to that to an extent. But obviously he has more time to adjust now. And the hope is that the shots start to fall and he really gives Washington a dynamic that they can't find elsewhere, and that allows him to be a guy who gets 15, 18 minutes a night off the bench for them.
Well, I'll be really interested to see how that rotation shakes out. Obviously, they're going to get some guys back. This COVID pause is not going to last forever. They'll get. I think Caldwell Pope's already back. I think they're probably getting a lot of those guys back already. And then now, of course, they added Rui back. He's back in the mix. Certainly Rui is not a 3-point shooter the way that Corey is. They're not going to have similar roles, at least offensively, but he does kind of play that small ball 4 role. I assume he didn't play a huge role his first game back because he's just kind of getting back in the swing of things after missing the start of the season with his personal reasons. And now he's back, and now I'm excited for that, but it's another one of those situations where it impacts another Gonzaga player. And I'm curious if you think that how much harder it's going to be for Corey to get minutes now that Rui's back in the mix. Yeah,
that is interesting because I think Rui was still part of this front office's tenure, right? I think it was maybe their first draft.
I think so.
I think Tommy Shepard is the guy running things over there in DC. But yeah, it is interesting. So I kind of wonder, how they go about this, because the other guy that they have out there who's maybe similar to Corey in some ways is Davis Bertans, right? But he struggled for most of the year as well. But obviously he has. I think it's interesting to see or to envision how they approach it, right? Because on one hand, Bertans has a little bit better track record. He wasn't great last year, but he's a guy who can give you NBA minutes. Whereas Kispert, you don't know as much of that, but he's a guy who just spent the 15th pick on.
Right.
You have a little more who Bertans is. You don't know as much about Kispert, so I'd be interested to kind of know how that dynamic goes in terms of who they give more minutes to. Rui, it's interesting because you look at their 3 last picks. It's Rui, Deni Avdija, and Corey, who all kind of play that 3 versus 4. I'd say Deni has the biggest leg up because he's been pretty impressive defensively with his cutting and can handle the ball a little bit. But it's 3 guys that are kind of fighting for minutes, and so obviously you always want to take the guy that you believe is the best available player. Usually,
right?
I say usually, not always, but fit is kind of maybe can be the differentiator, but. These 3 guys are kind of working against each other to an extent. And then if you throw Bertans, a guy they just gave an extension to, there's 4 guys there that you've shown a level of commitment to. And now it's kind of okay, go figure it out. 2 of you are going to get minutes, not all of you. So it's an interesting approach there. I don't know, maybe kind of all the rationale behind it can be kind of conflicting, but it feels like Rui has a leg up. I mean, I didn't watch Rui's first game back against the Magic, but and I don't know how it unfolded, but Rui got 14 minutes. Corey got 11. I don't know if Corey's were maybe more in development time when the game was out of reach, things like that. I don't know if Rui was the other way around there. I'd have to go catch it. I guess the Wizards only won by 2, so I don't know. I guess they both played. I could have known that at least. My goodness, he's more prepared for these things. But my instinct would tell me right now that Rui would have the leg up just because he's got a little more cachet as a guy who's shown more. Probably about the same age as Corey, right? Or Rui is a year older, right? Because I guess because Rui was my class at Gonzaga and Corey's a year behind me, so that would make sense. Now I'm not old, but I'm starting. My goodness, get myself a little bit there. But Rui is a guy who's shown a little more in the NBA. Was a lottery pick. I think it was the 9th overall pick in 2019. So. And I think his ability to kind of even be a face-up scorer, attack the glass a little more, be a better finisher around the rim, which is his size and length advantage over Corey, would probably be the reason that I would see him getting a leg up. But also, I just think Rui he's probably a little more juice to his game, I guess, for lack of a nuanced term.
Sure, yeah.
That maybe this team could really benefit from. because Corey's they've only played 25, maybe 30 games for Corey. He hasn't played every night, but just hasn't given you that high level off ball shooting that maybe you would want. If you're shooting 40% from three, 38%, or was trending really, really well upward, then I could see the Wizards kind of saying, okay, let's continue to let him ride. But 36% is the sample we have that's encouraging now, and the defense has been okay at times, but not great, and the cutting's been good, but like not incredible. So I think the other thing I want to add about Corey, though, is I feel like he's been a little better inside the arc as of late as well, just kind of a little more craft. So I don't know if the numbers backed it up, but in the games I've seen, I've been a little more encouraged. So Rui, I think, is the guy who's going to get the first crack if you had to choose between one of them. But it's a tough spot for both of them because, as I mentioned, there's 4 guys off the bench who the administration and the front office has shown a level of commitment to in the last couple of years, and so you can't play 4 guys who play the 3 and the 4 off the bench. Because none of them are going to handle it right. None of them. It's not like you have some great lead ball handler who was a 6'7", 6'8" player. They're all guys who are probably complementary roles offensively, even defensively. Right. Denny maybe is a little more of a elite guy defensively when he plays, but hope that provides some insight. But it's an interesting thing to watch shake out as I think the Wizards play again Tuesday, I think, right now. So I don't know exactly, but I'll be interested to kind of see what happens there with how the minutes shake out. As you mentioned, as guys kind of start to get back. I think Aaron Holiday might be the only. I don't know if Aaron Holiday's out of the rotation, but he didn't play on Sunday. He's the guy who was in the rotation at times. So it should be interesting to see. But Rui would be my pick between the two Gonzaga Wizards.
Absolutely. And it's funny that we continue to have conversations about Zags taking playing time from Zags. That's what I want to talk about in the third segment. Of course, the Memphis Grizzlies and the Killian, Tillie, Brandon Clarke kind of pairing and how they've been utilizing those 2 guys recently in Memphis. Before we get there, though, let's talk about today's sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline is back and better than ever. BetOnline has a new web interface for the start of the NBA and college basketball seasons and features more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number 1 spot for all of the basketball and football action this season. Head to our new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still chatting with Jackson Frank at Locked On Zags. We are now going to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. We've teased it a couple of times already, of course. You kind of already touched on this, Jackson, but before we talk about the specific Brandon Clarke and Killian Tillie rotation and how those guys have been used, you watch more NBA than me, so I don't know, if you've got some insight into some teams that I'm not thinking of, but I think Memphis is the most fun team in the league right now. I'm curious if you agree, because they have been a blast to watch lately.
Yeah, if anyone, I mean, obviously fun is always, the most subjective term, but
sure.
I think that's a totally reasonable answer. It'd probably be up there for me. I think, the Cavs, I think to me are still pretty fun, less so after the Ricky Rubio injury, unfortunately, which is a huge bummer. The Bulls have been fun. I think the Hornets are pretty fun with the style they play, but I mean, you say I got to watch one team the rest of the year, and I would still be, my finances would be intact still. I think the Grizzlies would be it for sure. They have it's not just that like they're fun. They have a lot of guys who are fun in different ways, right? Ja is the high flying guy who makes everything happen, in the open court and finishes all these plays. And then you have his backcourt mate Desmond Bane, who's a little more not control. He's a little slower pace to play, and he snipes everything from deep. He's a solid passer too. And then you have a guy like Steven Adams, who wouldn't be the guy I would think third, but like pretty fun passer, makes things happen in the offensive glass. So I'm sure there's guys I'm missing, of course. Dylan Brooks and his, he's out for a little bit, unfortunately, with I think a sprained ankle, which is a huge bummer. But just the way he plays, always confident, always getting under guys' skin, playing really awesome on-ball defense. So D'Anthony Melton is fun as well. So I think absolutely I think if you polled people who consider themselves NBA fans, I feel like Memphis would be the winner right now in terms of that label, and I can't dispute it whatsoever. Not that I would dispute it, regardless, but I would. Right. I think it's a pretty easy pick. They've been really, really fun, and just a team that continues to find itself in awesome games and just fun, and not just awesome, not like close games, but just like really, really enjoyable and captivating games, which is what you want to see.
Absolutely. And I think, we talk about Brandon Clarke and Killian Tillie, of course. We didn't mention them in that conversation, but they have both been a lot of fun to watch this year. Clarke has been really good lately. And we touched on this a little bit when we were talking about Sabonis, but Brandon Clarke's kind of usage through his first 2.5 NBA seasons has been a bit mystifying to me. Obviously, he fell, quite a bit in the draft because of concerns about his age, and his standing reach was pretty limited, and I think his just overall arm wingspan was pretty short, which are understandable concerns for a guy whose offensive profile really didn't match the modern NBA in a lot of ways. I could understand why there was some concern, but Memphis kind of snatched him up at I think 21st, I believe, is where he went in the draft. And then he had a great rookie year, which, for a guy who was at advanced age and coming off a great season, it wasn't too surprising. And then it seemed like Memphis didn't know what to do with him almost. Like they tried to turn him into an outside shooter, which was just horrible, and he's not good at it. And I think they messed with his shot form, which made it even worse. And they seemed to be kind of utilizing him in ways that don't match with his skill set, at least from somebody who I didn't watch a lot of full Memphis games last year, so I don't know how much of that was actually accurate. And then he got benched completely in the playoffs. Now it seems like they finally started to kind of figure out who this player is and what kind of role he can play. But it was very odd to me that Memphis, again, a team who drafted him and ostensibly, had done research on him before he joined the team, seemed to struggle to figure out what kind of player they wanted him to be.
Yeah, so I think there are a few things at hand, at least from based off what my read of the rookie year version of Brandon Clarke, like as you mentioned, was electric and really good. And then maybe the fall off we saw, which, cratered, as you mentioned, with not being in the rotation at all in the playoffs, unfortunately. When the prologue was an underwhelming second year compared to his rookie year.
Right.
I believe he suffered a groin or a hip flexor injury in the offseason after his rookie year. And I think based off my viewing, I just don't think he was as explosive, right? That was one of not just his ability to jump high, but his ability to jump quickly and explode for his
right.
Whether it was the floater or, catching lobs or just finishing plays, in the pick and roll. So I think that hurt him a little bit. But then also, whether it was Memphis suggesting tweak his shot or his trainers or him going about it, his form looked different. It looked different from where he was at Gonzaga, which is already a big stride from where it was at San Jose State. Right. And so I thought it was good after his rookie year. And I think he shot 36% from three, good enough that if you needed a space to the corners and the ball swung his way, you would feel okay with him taking that shot. Right. And then he had a little bit of a hitch or some sort of delay in it, which I think is still there. But now instead, he doesn't really take threes. He's taken about, I think, 15 or 14 this year. He's only hit 3 of them, maybe. I don't know. He's shooting 13% from 3.
Right.
But he looks back to his really, really spry, lively self as a play finisher around the rim. The floater is back. I mean, we saw that floater at Gonzaga. We saw it as a rookie in Memphis, shooting almost 70% on 2-pointers, which is a ridiculous number. His true shooting is I think it's about the same as rookie year, but the league average true shooting is a little lower, so it's even better, relatively speaking. The defense has been impressive, moves well. He's good help side finisher, help side rim protector. So, it just feels like he's back to the ridiculously good athlete that maybe wasn't present as much because of maybe an injury or two, and then he doesn't take threes anymore because they're not going in.
Right.
And so it feels like similar to the guy we saw at Gonzaga for 1 year, obviously in a smaller role.
Right.
But he's not taking threes. He's finishing everything around the rim.
Right.
Playing pretty good defense. Not the dominant defender he was at Gonzaga, because if he was, then he would be a starter. It's one of the best defensive seasons we've seen in college basketball, as modern college basketball. I'm not a story on that, but I'll say it as Gonzaga fan. That's fine. So I think it's just a combination of realizing that the jumper's not there. Let's just stop taking him. And so, whether that's on him, whether that's on the coaching staff, everyone deserves credit who's involved with that. And then just feels like he's back to the athletic profile we saw at Gonzaga in his rookie year, whether it's health or whatever else is at play. And so, it's been really fun because, year 2 was fine for 21st pick. But for a guy who made an all rookie team, in year 1, it was definitely more disappointing. And as we mentioned, it finished with him barely playing in the playoffs. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe, as we said, Memphis could be a team that, looks to, improve its high-end talent, and Clarke could be a guy who entices a rebuilding team. Again, it's a little different because he's 25 or 26, right? So
yeah,
the classic third-year player. They spent 4 years in college, but definitely a guy I think could help a lot of teams. And obviously, he's helping Memphis. I'm not saying at all he's going to get traded, but
mm-hmm.
it's been really, really nice to see him get back to the guy we saw and be even better, honestly. And he was, I think, a little bit on both ends. So really, really enjoying him. I think I caught Memphis' first game of the year against the Cavs, and I was watching him, and he got minutes, and I was like, oh yeah, this is the Brandon Clarke I remember. Not the one last year. Like he had like one play where he just jumped out of the gym for a finish or got really high for a floater, and they made a couple of defensive plays. I was like, okay, Brandon Clarke is back. Like I don't want to be too hasty with that proclamation, but just the way he was operating, moving on the floor, I was like, this is the guy that I became a huge fan of at Gonzaga and really enjoyed watching as a rookie.
Well, we got to move on to the last Memphis player. Of course, that's Killian Tillie, who was starting over Brandon Clarke briefly. I don't know if that is still the rotation that they're utilizing. Obviously, Tillie was perhaps the most notable Gonzaga player outside of Kevin Pangos to take advantage of extra playing time because of either injuries or COVID situations. Obviously, Pangos stepped briefly into a starting role for Cleveland, which didn't go exceptionally well, unfortunately. But Tillie kind of parlayed some added time to really, really stand out in a significant way. And now, a fully healthy, I believe, or close to fully healthy Memphis team is playing him pretty significant minutes. And, he's a guy who I think anybody who watched him in college, whether they watched him every single game like I did or watched him just periodically, I think you could tell he was an NBA player. It was just a matter of whether he was going to stay healthy. And there was some, very valid reasons to be concerned about that. And now, through this season, he has been healthy. He's been the, 6'10" outside shooter that you wanted him to be. He's been, at least from my viewing, better defensively than I thought that he was going to be at the NBA level. And now he looks like a guy who, I was going to say, looks like a guy who's going to play his way off a two-way contract, but he already did that. He did. He got a 2-year, $4 million guaranteed contract, which is fantastic for a guy who has been dealing with so many injuries. It's fantastic for anybody to get a bag and to get a guaranteed contract. But for a guy like him, I mean, what an incredible story to go from not being drafted in a year where I thought he probably should have been drafted, but again, understand why there was some trepidation, to being a guaranteed contract NBA player. It's been a really remarkable run for him, and he's absolutely earned it with his play on the court.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, 5 weeks into the year, I think he played like, I want to say 20 minutes, and he didn't do much last year. And so, like, honestly, like I was worried that they, maybe they might cut him to find someone, maybe find a guy that they felt like they could rely on more. And then, injuries and the hit, and the Grizzlies had their own, bout with COVID absences, as every team has, unfortunately. And he stepped up, and he started a few games. They've played him at the 3 a lot, which is really interesting. I don't have the lineup data in front of me, but I feel like that happened barely at Gonzaga. And obviously that, as there's people are a little bigger and taller in the NBA, but I never thought playing the 3 and doing well. Unfortunately, he like barely played against the Lakers. I don't know if it looked like the Grizzlies a little bit back to full health. Kyle Anderson played, and Tillie was back. But I think as of late, the jumper's been a little bit, get 3 threes against the Clippers. I think he's been a good off-ball mover. He's always a great connective passer at Gonzaga. Not a guy that's going to be, leading the pick and roll, but a guy who can, flash to the middle of a zone or flash, high post and make stuff happen from there. I think he's been solid in that regard, moves his feet pretty well. Like, for a guy who's asked to play the 3 and navigate screens at 6'10", and quite a few injuries that have, like if you go back and watch freshman sophomore year Killian Tillie versus who he is now, the level of fluidity is way different. Like a lot of injuries derailed him, but I think he's handled that pretty well. Like I don't think I would have said he could succeed at playing the 3 in the NBA, and when he was a prospect at Gonzaga. So I think that's been cool to watch him be a smart player with off-ball defense, and but sort of a little bit inside the arc. Like he just isn't a super quick player, and I think he's obviously not a super strong player. That's hurt him, but I'll be curious. I think about to tip off on Tuesday against the. I'll be curious to see if he plays again, but obviously a bit of a bummer that he's not playing. He didn't play the last game. Played 24 seconds against the Lakers, but at the very least, he's a guy that Memphis trusts to step up and play significant minutes when they're down full of guys in the front court.
Yep.
And as you mentioned, has a guaranteed contract now, which I I was pretty bummed about because Killian's a guy that I really, really enjoyed watching. Obviously same class as me at Gonzaga. So, and I just love the way, I just like guys who are really good shooters and good passers and play with a level of feel, a really high feel. And so, with me, and so it's cool to know that at least he's in the NBA for a couple of years at the very least, and maybe his spot as a long-term rotation guy isn't in Memphis because, as we mentioned, they have so many good players up and down the roster. But at the very least, it seemed like the last 5 weeks showcase that he can give you good minutes on a good team. The jumper's going to have to continue. He's going to have to be a guy that shoots better than 33% from three. Does a little more inside the arc, but I think you can at least see signs of progress for him. And so I'm very curious to monitor him the rest of the year, kind of how his role, fluctuates and what happens there as Memphis continues to probably just thrive because it's a really good team. But it's very much a positive now compared to 6 weeks ago. And it looked like he might, as I said, it looked like a guy who might, find Memphis. And so at the very least, he's got some track really nice.
Absolutely. Jackson, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk about these guys. There's so many more guys we could talk about, which is an amazing thing about Gonzaga's basketball program right now. We didn't even touch on, injured guys like Kelly Olynyk or Zach Collins. We didn't really talk about Joel Ayayi, but perhaps we'll have you on another time to talk about some of those guys or talk about the guys on Gonzaga's current roster who are almost certainly going to be NBA players in the future. Thanks again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said at the top, it's nice that we can spend an entire podcast that goes more than 10 minutes talking about Gonzaga players and discuss them in depth rather than maybe this is the year they get a break because they actually are playing. So appreciate having me on, and always happy to talk to Gonzaga.
Appreciate it. All right, that is going to do it for me and for Locked On Zags today. We got BYU coming up on Thursday, so plenty of coverage ahead of that Thursday night game, all right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Of course, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button if you have not yet already. Finally, thanks again for making this show your first listen of the day. Now is a great time to make your second listen of the day, the Locked On Bets podcast. Locked On Bets is your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked On Bets is hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. All right, thank you all for listening, and go Zags.